Right, I've got Dr. Richard Scott, GP, with me. It's almost like it's a session for my throat, but my throat is fine, and we're not here for me. So, hello, Richard. How are you?
Thank you. Very good to speak to you, Andy. I'm fine, thanks.
Jolly good. Right, let's just start with some comments from last week before we dive into another one for today. So, I had this one, Mary in Montana. I so enjoyed the interview. Lots of O's. So enjoyed the interview. Sleep is so interesting. I learned so much. We had anonymous one, very much enjoying the show today. Found the interview with Dr. Richard Scott really interesting. Thanks for sharing it. And then another one that came in, a very interesting interview about sleep. It was nice that a couple of my routines were confirmed as good by Richard. So there you go. Not just informing us, encouraging people as well.
Well, that's good. I mean, to be honest, it's whenever we have a subject like this, we all learn from it. Some things you think, oh, I've been doing that right, but other things you think, oh, maybe I need to change tack on that one. So yeah, I guess it's function.
No, it's really good. Okay, so today we're looking at caffeine. I say that while drinking Coke, which has caffeine, because caffeine comes in all sorts of forms, whether it's tea, coffee, chocolate, Coke, all that kind of stuff. So go for it, Richard.
Well, you've stolen one of my lines there, Andy. But,
Sorry.
But no, you're absolutely right. It's quite interesting because Andy suggested these first couple of topics, and obviously last week we spoke about sleep, which isn't just nice, but really beneficial, and you even live longer if you sleep well. So today, in a sense, is a bit of a related subject, but from the opposite angle. So it's how to stay awake. And so we're talking about caffeine, as Andy glugs his caffeine in the shape of Coke. So we all know a bit about caffeine. What can we learn? And is there anything new in research? And the answer again is yes. So I'm grateful actually to Andy for prompting me about one bit of research, which in fact I'd also read about in the national newspapers. So we're going to come to that in a moment. So that, if you like, that's the stimulus for this particular subject. But first, I think a disclaimer. So just like Andy's glugging his Coke, I'm a strong coffee drinker. And looking back in my history, my dad, who'd worked in India in the war, loved strong coffees and loved strong curries. He's passed now, and in those days I thought, why is the kitchen always smelling of coffee or curry? Now I'd like to tell him, Dad, you were right. You were right about coffee, and you were right about curry. Sadly, it's a bit late, but in my room at work, I used to have one of these glug coffee machines, glugging away, and patients would be thinking, "What's all this about?" And I said, "Well, actually, this is to keep me awake, so I can treat you." These days, I take a flask, and it has the same function. So I'm into caffeine. But the question really is it good for us? And what amounts are recommended? Is it ever bad for us? And what does the new research have to teach us? So that's what we're going to be looking at in the next 10 minutes or so. So the first thing, and Andy and I are good examples of this, caffeine is the most widely available stimulant in the world. We've talked about it's in coffee and tea, it's in Coke. But going back to sort of plants, do you know it's actually in more than 60? That's 60 plants, including cola nuts and, of course, cacao, from which chocolate is made. And so it got me thinking, caffeine is really widely available. Perhaps that's because our maker, God, the creator, thought it was a good idea for us.
Amen.
And I'd also imagine, I'd agree with that, I'd also imagine that animals, of course, who also will eat leaves, perhaps it stimulates animals, not just us. So maybe it's not just for human consumption, but for animals as well. That's just a thought. Anyway, it seems to be overall good. And in fact, funny enough, that's what the research shows. Overall, caffeine makes us more alert. That's probably the number one reason we drink it, apart from that it tastes good. It makes us more alert. It increases concentration and thus productivity. We're more productive. It improves our mood. It improves our well-being. Seems to limit depression, and on the sort of more important front, it reduces heart failure, a common cause of death, and Parkinson's disease. So there we are. It's got a lot of good effects. Is it all good? Well, no. There are some adverse effects from caffeine. And for some susceptible people, even the normal amounts of caffeine that have a good effect in most of us can be adverse in a few. So some people, it reduces their sleep, increases their anxiety. I'm not going to major on this because it wasn't majored about in the papers, but yeah, there can be a few people who don't respond well to caffeine, so they have to leave it off. And I know of people that literally can't drink coffee or tea at all. It just doesn't suit them, which is true, to be honest, of all drugs. Thinking of caffeine as a drug, even paracetamol, aspirin can upset some people. So, there we are. No difference with caffeine. But I think the more important thing really is in terms of the general effects. What about caffeine? Can it be generally, not just in susceptible people, but are there general adverse effects? And yes, and particularly if we had caffeine in too great a quantity, it certainly can affect our sleep. So people, and I've met people like this. I just don't sleep well. If I drink caffeine. And that's because of overstimulation. And some of us, especially as we get older, have to get up more at night for natural function, should we say?
Yes.
So, yes, too much caffeine can certainly cause anxiety, palpitations, restlessness. We don't sleep so well. So it's not all good. Some people can get worse headaches. I've come across that as a doctor. Migraines can be stimulated by caffeine, and it can affect our kidney function. But one more interesting effect, and this I'll throw out to the listeners, Andy, which I'd forgotten about, but actually is very true. Because caffeine dehydrates us, in other words, it makes us pee more, it can affect our skin quality. So it can make us look older. It dries us out, makes us more wrinkly. And obviously turning that around, the corollary to that is those people who are heavy users and find themselves looking a bit wrinkly, should we say, if they reduce their caffeine, can look younger. So,
okay.
There's a simple tip to look younger. If you're too heavy a caffeine drinker, give your skin a chance. Reduce the caffeine. And if you think, well, gosh, what about so that's general effects. What about if you've just had too much 1 or 2 days? You think of students, staying up all night, drinking coffee, then suddenly they're getting anxious, palpitations. Well, what can we do? Well, we can flush it out simply, as we know, by drinking normal liquid water, dilute squash, so you can flush it out. So these are some of the more general excess effects of caffeine. I think, and we'll come to what the sort of ideal amount of caffeine is in a moment, because these are the sort of practical questions around, the most widely available stimulant in the world. So here's another question. How long does caffeine stay in the system? People say, some people I can't drink in the evening. Some people I can't have caffeine even after lunch. It affects me too much. Well, they've got a good basis behind that scientifically, because caffeine, when we drink it, peaks at about an hour, but still half of what we drink is in our system at 6 hours. And it takes 10 hours to clear it completely. So it's a relatively long-acting drug in that sense. So 10 hours to clear completely. So I understand people say I can't drink after lunchtime, no strong coffee after lunchtime. Well, that makes some sense from the science behind it. So that leads us on to the question of how much is good for us. Most of us have caffeine. Okay, what's good for us? Well, and that, if you like, is the $64,000 question for those of us of a certain age. Remembering that, how much is good for us? But remembering that it's a drug, remembering that it is addictive, and too much can cause dependence, and actually does change the brain chemistry. So just be careful. It's a stimulant drug. So how much is good for us? Well, my information tells me it's safe up to 400 milligrams a day. Now, that doesn't mean much to most of us, but that's equivalent to 4 cups of brewed coffee. So there we are. That's the safe level. In other words, don't go beyond that. 4 cups of brewed coffee is okay. After 6 cups, then we begin to get symptoms. Most of us will get symptoms of rise in heart rate, rise in blood pressure, perhaps the palpitations we mentioned earlier, a bit restless. So 6 cups onwards, definitely not good. 4 cups recommended of decent coffee, that is, as a top level. And with a proviso that the elderly, and I'm talking about over 70s, are a bit more sensitive. So drink a bit less. And that also applies to youngsters, under 18, and pregnant ladies. So if you're in those groups, and particularly as people get older, probably a bit less tolerant. Now, I've been talking about coffee. What about tea? Well, absolutely. Tea contains caffeine, on average, about half the amount of an average cup of coffee. Now, tea doesn't vary too much in strength. Coffee obviously varies a lot more. But on average, tea is about half the strength of coffee in terms of caffeine, but has the same effects. So you can probably get away with 8 cups of tea in a day, although you might be visiting the bathroom a little bit more often if you do that. So now here's the next question. Say you listen to this, you think, yeah, do you know, my coffee or my tea consumption's been rising. I need to reduce it. How quickly can I do so? And is there such a thing as withdrawal? Well, yes, there is, as there is from many drugs. And if people suddenly stop, say you think, right, that's it, I'm going to knock coffee on the head from 8 cups a day to 0, bad idea, because symptoms of withdrawal include headache, tiredness, all the things actually that coffee is or caffeine is good for generally. Turn it round, you become more tired, so less alert, reduced mood rather than increased mood, poor concentration, because caffeine obviously increases our concentration, cranky, yeah. So turn around the good effects and you get the side effects of withdrawal. And the effects begin on days 1 to 2 and last for about 9 days. So again, that's a reasonably long effect. So you're going to have a bad week and a half if you go from rather than from 0 to 60. If you go from 60 to 0, then miles an hour, then you're going to have some effect. So reduce, as in all these things, reduce your intake rather than suddenly stop it dead. So we'll just go on to the new research, and then I'll bring Andy back. Just a couple of papers which have been interesting. Andy showed me one, and I found another one which was in the national newspapers. And the first one is the one that I found, and it's this. Coffee helps us to lose weight in relation to exercise. Now, this is a bit of a strange one. Those of us who exercise, I like jogging. I would never really consider a coffee before a jog. Why? Well, it's going to dehydrate me, and I'm going to get dry and blah, blah, blah. Well, interestingly, they've done a study where people who have a strong black coffee, not white, a strong black coffee, just in advance of exercise, seem to lose weight more when they exercise. So if you're exercising to lose weight, I'm fortunately in the happy position of not having to do that. I exercise because I like it. But many people exercise to lose weight. Well, have a strong cup of black coffee first, and you might be more successful, the research tells us. So that's an interesting one. I'd spotted that one myself. And then the second one that Andy put me onto, and something I'd also come across, is coffee seems to help us. It's beneficial in reducing frailty in the elderly. Now, this is important for GPs. Frailty obviously is a massive issue, and particularly as people are living longer. You know, when I was a kid, you got your 70 years and 10, as the Bible tells us. But nowadays, many people think, gosh, 80's the new normal. And many people are, of course, living to 90, and an increasing number of people living to over 100. But you want to live with a decent quality of life. And frailty is therefore a big one. So the study was of 12,000 people, participants, over 20 years, so a decent length of study in the US. And they took people in middle age from 45 onwards, drinking 4 cups of coffee a day, the recommended top amount, and looked at their effect in terms of frailty. And they found that drinking 4 cups of coffee a day for 20 years in middle age onwards reduced frailty in old age. And how was it measured? Well, hand grip strength was raised, getting up and about, quicker responses to physical testing, more energy, and less exhaustion. Obviously, these studies have to factor out everything else in terms of exercise, lifestyle, etc. But coffee and caffeine in particular seems to improve us in terms of less frailty in old age. So again, it's good for us. Just don't have too much. And frailty matters, not just because you feel better, a bit like sleeping well, but actually people who are less frail fall less, and falls, of course, in the elderly are a massive issue. They seem to have better disease resistance and less hospitalization. So, actually being less frail really, again, will help us live longer because we fall less. We're not, we're less susceptible to disease and we're in hospital less. So there you have it. That's the conclusion. Overall, caffeine is great when used responsibly. And it made me think, well, isn't that true of all God's good gifts? And I would put caffeine up. I'm sure there'll be caffeine in heaven, along with red wine.
Oh, yes.
Curry. When we feast in heaven, which the Bible tells us we will, I'd imagine that caffeine will be up there in responsible quantities. There we go.
As long as there's Earl Grey tea, I'll be happy.
Oh, I like Earl Grey, but half and half. I halve it. One bag of normal tea and one bag of Earl Grey. Proportionally in a pot. Perfect.
I've never tried that. I'll have to try that one.
Oh, even better. There we go.
Right, let's work backwards from that last stuff you were saying about the frailty. The obvious question is, what is happening as a result of caffeine that is doing that? Is that something to do with the caffeine in the system physiologically, or is it more to do because of caffeine, people are doing stuff perhaps more or longer in life?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, the exact physiology, but I would, if I had to put my bottom dollar on it, it would be your second point, that it makes us more alert. Therefore, we get up and our up and get at it is more tuned. We get out there and do more. It keeps us more awake, and certainly for the elderly, and from middle age onwards, we need. If you don't do it, you lose it. And therefore, if it helps people get up and about, I suspect that's the answer. But there may be more to it, and I'd have to say I don't know.
Okay, and then the other one is about the coffee before exercise being good. I don't have any suggestions apart from the question of why. Again, why could that be?
From that paper, they didn't really know why. It's an interesting thing, and maybe what had happened. What happens on these things? They're often fortuitous, these studies. Somebody says, "Oh, I just exercise better when I have a coffee." Maybe it just gives them the oomph to do it more. So you push yourself a bit harder. But it's a very good question, and logically, I cannot see the reason behind that, unless it's simply that you exercise more. You've been given more of an oomph to exercise more, because why should it burn off more energy? Good question. Some of these studies will give you an answer without telling you why.
Yeah,
and I think this one, and perhaps the previous ones are in that category, because it's not logical.
No, fair enough. That brings me back to one of the first things you said then, because I was interviewing Carl Beach, who's got young onset Parkinson's, and I clocked when you said about it can reduce Parkinson's. So, and also heart failure. What's going on there? Because my totally non-medical brain, I think caffeine, is a stimulant, and I would expect it to conflict with what's going on at Parkinson's. So how can it help reduce Parkinson's?
Yes, you're asking me very deep questions.
Sorry.
Maybe what I'll do, perhaps even if you can give me a moment, I'll come back next week and I'll look up all of those questions. Why does it make a difference in frailty? Why does it make a difference in exercise? Why does it make a difference in Parkinson's and heart failure? So I'll go into it in a bit more detail, because I think these are important questions. So before we have next week's main topic, which we haven't yet decided, I'm going to answer those questions by looking into it in more detail, with the proviso that I can only give answers if the people who've done the studies have got the answers.
Well,
but if they have got the answers, I shall bring them back to your listeners next week.
There is that part, isn't it? Right.
No, but I think these are important questions.
Well, yeah.
Caffeine's a stimulant. Often there's a reduction in some of the stimulants in Parkinson's, for example, thus leading to the pathology. However, let me look into it, and I will give hopefully the answer, not too nastily physiological, but a sort of common man's answer, which will help me and help the listeners to those questions.
Cool. I'm very much a common man, so simple is good. But it makes me ask questions. Right. Let me go back to a personal experience, because I may have shared this, I think, with you, not on camera. So I was suspected to have atrial fibrillation, and I had a bout of it. I was in hospital 15 hours. They got my heart down, and I was chatting to the consultant the following day, and he put me on various medications until I could be properly checked out.
Yeah.
One of the things that he talked about was caffeine can have an impact on the heart. So I sort of took that to mean don't drink caffeine. So I spent 18 months or so waiting to see a cardiologist, not drinking caffeine. When I finally saw my cardiologist, I said, "Is that overkill?" And he just looked at me very lovingly and said, "Yes." A cup of tea is not going to cause atrial fibrillation. I'm not quite sure how you.
Delighted he said that.
Yeah, from one thing to the other, he was very kind and he said, "No, that's fine. You drink caffeine."
Yes.
I've known people who've stopped caffeine, absolutely loved it. I was off it for nearly a year and a half. I missed it every single day. And when Jo had her morning coffee, I felt like I was trying to absorb the caffeine through the smell.
No, you're absolutely right. And the other thing is, we have to live. I remember my father-in-law was ultimately dying from pancreatic cancer, and there were all sorts of foods. You can't have this, you can't have that because of your insulin is failing. And he just said, actually, I know my life is reducing, but it sure feels like it. And he went eating the foods that he wanted to eat because he knew he was going to die anyway, and he wanted to enjoy himself. Now, that's a bit of an extreme example, but as doctors, we've got to make recommendations while also recognizing that people need to live their lives, and absolutely don't cut something out unless it's essential, because otherwise we're not helping quality of life. It certainly feels like you're living longer.
Yeah, well, I was mountain biking at the time, and as a precaution, they put me on blood thinners because I was trying to work out, is this serious? Is it whatever? And I said to my GP, having never had, I was quite scared, come back from hospital. I said, and of course, you'll be telling me to stop mountain biking because it's really dangerous for your blood thinners. Absolutely not, he said. Live your life, get out. So I did. Good
man, but please don't fall over and bash your head.
No,
you're absolutely right. It is so much of general practice is literally we've got to weigh things in the balance. One drug causes this; it's really good, safe for your blood pressure, but it affects your kidneys, and then we have to weigh up a decision what to do with the patient. You're having a chat, but no, in that situation, absolutely, I would go for the exercise. Totally agree.
Yeah, which I did. We used to live on Salisbury Plains, so it was just the most perfect idyllic setting. But I really thought he'd say, "Oh yes, definitely." So he said, "Just do me a favor." He said, "Take cotton wool balls and tape because it's better than a plaster. If you do fall, cotton wool ball with a bit of tape, it's better. It puts pressure down and carry on." So I did.
Good,
and I never fell off. Right. One of the things that threw me was how long it stays in the system. So you said it peaks at 1 hour. By 6 hours, it's 50%. And by 10 hours later, it's then clearing out the system. So when I was younger, I would drink caffeinated tea without any consequence or thought. When I was sort of in my mid-20s, maybe early 30s, I suddenly realized I was bang wide awake, eyes completely open at 3 a.m. because I'd had a caffeinated tea. And there was no real gradual sort of change. It was sort of quite sudden in that area. I can't remember when, that's too long ago. So we change as we get older, don't we? So what was okay then changes.
We can become more sensitive. Clearly, in the elderly, it's an issue, but that's something that will have progressed throughout life. Not just it suddenly comes on when you're 70. We get more sensitive throughout life, and some people will find that earlier than others. So I'm okay to have coffee, say 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Now I'm reluctant to have a strong coffee after 7. I'm going to be up at night. Well, that's that's not a good result.
Yeah, I don't drink caffeine past lunch. Whenever lunch is, that's my cut off. And that was a doctor in the hospital when I had my AF scare. I just look, my advice: lunch, no more.
Well, fair enough.
And that worked. Right. So you're saying brewed coffee. Just to clarify for people who may not fully understand what you mean like a percolator machine. So coffee drips through and it drip feeds.
Not the terrible stuff that we get from the NHS, which is essentially chicory masquerading as coffee. That's not going to keep you awake during the day or during the night. But proper stuff that's brewed. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So one of the things that occurs to me is I think you can now buy caffeine like tablets.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Have I dreamed that, or is that true?
Yes, that's correct.
Are they good? How do we consider those?
Never taken them, and I'm not quite sure why you would, when you can have caffeine in a much nicer form. In Coke, coffee, tea. Why would you have caffeine unless you can't get hold of it? I don't know. You're on up a mountain somewhere I don't know. If I would only have such a thing if I was restricted. Otherwise, what's the advantage? Surely it's just another way that drug companies make money out of us.
Well, yeah. I mean, a cup of coffee or tea. I mean, I've watched people, especially. I love the smell of coffee. I've never stand the taste. But I love watching people who like a coffee, and it's that enjoyment, that flavour. I'm just thinking, but it's a pill. Where's the pleasure?
People make pills for so many things these days, and they're not all recommended.
No, exactly. Okay, so trying to bring us back to some sort of faith component as well. We've joked a little bit about in heaven there better be coffee and Earl Grey tea, but where do you think coffee and caffeine fits into God's creation? How is it? I mean, God made things. We believe that. We believe that He made all the birds, the animals, trees, and the plants. And plants, obviously, cocoa, caffeine. So, why do you think God made coffee?
Well, a very good question. I can only imagine because he knew that a stimulant is a good idea, and this is a good stimulant, I might say, because there are many stimulants that people take, magic mushrooms, etc., that are harmful. And I think he gives us brains, and we can try these things, and if you like, he provides options, and it's up to us to select the wise ones. So he has given us wisdom, especially if we ask for it. And to my mind, caffeine is within reasonable quantities is a good stimulant. There are options. We're in a fallen world, and we can go down bad paths if we like. And you read about voodoo doctors and others, especially in South America, using all sorts of stimulants that one should not go near. And that's a lack of wisdom. But I think he gives us options, and he also gives us wisdom. So yeah, I think it's a deliberate policy from God. Otherwise, why would he make such a thing? It helps us, and perhaps even some animals as well.
I'm sure I saw a documentary where I think it was chimpanzees, perhaps, or monkeys, I don't remember, and they'd eaten the plant that we think of as coffee, I think, and they observed how awake these particular group of animals were, and it was this conclusion of, I think they're actually stimulated by the coffee bean, which is great.
Yeah, and animals like chimps will be smart enough to spot that. Oh, every time I have this, so yeah, they'll be there. It's maybe good for the animals. I know what you mean. I think I saw something about that once, but the details escape.
Yeah. Okay, so just one more thing. What would we be surprised by there being caffeine in? So I'll start this one because I drink it's a dandelion and burdock. It's a very nice branded one. And on the back, it says contains caffeine. And it's a very healthy drink. But I'm always surprised to see there's caffeine in it. So are there any things that we might be surprised by there being caffeine, because aside from the obvious teas and coffees?
Well, that's my next question for next week.
Oh, okay.
I'm a great believer in telling the truth, whether it's in an article or on radio. And I don't know the answer to that. There are more than 60, so I'm going to look up some more of those, and or maybe even your listeners can write in with some. Did you know that in whatever that there's caffeine? So maybe we could pass that one to the listeners as well.
Definitely. If you've got any questions for Richard about medical stuff, as anonymous as you choose to be, and that's fine, email us hello@pure247radio.org, hello@pure247radio.org. Ask your questions to Dr. Richard Scott, GP or family practitioner if you are in the US. Richard, it is a pleasure as ever. Thank you so much. I absolutely adore these sessions. I make pages of notes. This is just so much to digest.
Well, there's a lot, and you've certainly got me thinking, and so I'm going to do a bit of extra work for next week. So we'll start off with that next week, and then after that, we'll move on to a different subject.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's funny how one thing can just spur so much more, but it's fascinating, and it's like I say, it's good to know what. Sometimes it's good to know what's behind that, what the why, and I think there's more why that I'm fascinated by.
Research often stimulates us because and often about something you think, oh, that's bland or obvious. Well, is it? And look what the new research has turned up. So yeah, I'm sometimes stimulated by reading in a national newspaper. Oh, look at this study. That's interesting. Well, need to know more about it.
Cool. Well, fantastic, Richard. We will see you again next week for more of the same.
Thank you, Andy.